In this video, we'll introduce you to the idea of meters, measures, and tempo. In the last video, we discussed basic rhythmic values and the idea of beats. In this video, we'll introduce the idea of how beats get organized so that a player knows how to play the rhythms on the page. Even though individual notes can have different rhythmic values than the notes around them, the beats themselves usually fit into regular repeating patterns. That is to say, the beats are organized into groups of 2, 3, or 4, with these groups usually repeating for an entire piece. I'm sure you can think of examples for each of these. For 2 beats repeating, think of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and I'll play it and I'll count the 2 beats that are repeating patterns. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, etc. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You get the idea. Now for 3 beats, think of My Country 'Tis of Thee. And as before, I'll count along. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you could see that even though the rhythms don't necessarily go one note for every beat that I'm counting, nevertheless, you can still hear the 3-beat pattern repeating. The last example I'm going to play is a 4-beat pattern, America the Beautiful. There's something interesting about this that the other ones don't have, but let me count it first and you'll see what I mean. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. What was interesting about that is that I didn't count 1 on the first note that I played, but that I waited until the second note before counting the 1, 2, 3, 4. So having that one note come before the first strong beat, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. We call that an upbeat or a pickup sometimes, and we don't have to start on a strong beat, but sometimes we could start on a fraction of the 4-note patterns. What's interesting also about that is that a 4-note pattern can sometimes be thought of as a couple of 2-beat patterns. Let me count it that way. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So we see that the 2-beat repeating patterns and the 4-beat repeating patterns sound similar, but we'll learn subtle differences, and when music is written, it has to choose one or the other. On a musical staff, these regular patterns are indicated by 2 things: a time signature that indicates the meter, and the separation of these regular patterns of beats with a bar line. The time signature consists of 2 numbers arranged like a fraction without the line in between. Let's look at some typical time signatures. If I write a time signature of 2, 4, that means I have 2 beats per measure, and each measure contains 2 quarter notes. In other words, a quarter note is the beat. So if I write a quarter note here and a quarter note there, that's as much as that measure holds, and I put a line here, a bar line, to indicate I'm starting a new measure. and then that would be another measure, and I could even have something like that. And notice that the 2/8 notes last as long as 1/4 note. So here's beat 1, here's beat 2, here's beat 1, and here's beat 2, and here's beat 1, and beat 2 doesn't start there. So to play that in rhythm, if I'm counting 1, 2, and you see how that works. Now if I'm going to do something in 3/4, that means that there are 3 beats in a measure, and each one lasts as long as a 1/4 note. So I ran out of room there, but you could see 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Notice that the half note is twice as long as a 1/4 note, so that over here it gets beat 1 and it gets beat 2, and beat 3 doesn't come in until there. This gets beat 1, and then beats 2 and 3 are what we get there. Finally, for the examples that we have here, I'm going to write a time signature of 4/4, and in 4/4 there are going to be 4 beats in a measure. So the half note counts as 2, the 1/4 note makes the 3rd beat, and the other 1/4 note makes the 4th beat. And I can continue that down onto the next line. So if we count it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, you see how that works. Now the 1/4 note doesn't have to be the unit of beat. I could have different units of beat. For instance, I could have a half note as a unit of beat, in which case I would write a time signature of, let's say, 2, 2, and that means that I'm counting half notes. 1, 2, 1, 2 for those half notes. Why would I do that as opposed to 4/4? I would do that if most of the music were longer values like half notes, and it's easier to count that than to try to count it twice as fast when all I'm really thinking of for the most part are the half notes that I'm counting. Or I could go in the opposite direction and have the 8th note as a unit of beat. So if I had a time signature of 3/8, then something like that might be an entire measure. But one way or another, that's what the time signature means. It means what kind of note are we counting as the beat, and how many are there. To review, the top number is how many beats in each measure. The 2-beat measure is called duple meter. That sounds a lot like double, so you can remember it that way. The 3-beat measure is called triple meter, and the 4-beat measure is called quadruple meter. The bottom number tells us what's being counted for a beat. 4 on the bottom means we're counting quarter notes. 2 on the bottom means we're counting half notes. 8 on the bottom means that we're counting eighth notes. Now we need to think about how fast the beat moves, because the beat doesn't have to go at the same speed in every piece of music. We can indicate how fast the beat moves by something called a tempo marking. These can be descriptive. We can start with something that says fast, or very slow, or lively, or sadly. These descriptions don't tell us exactly how fast the beat goes, but if it gives you the mood of the piece or describes roughly how fast it goes, you can judge for yourself as an interpreter. In class, you'll learn a whole set of traditional Italian terms that have been in use for centuries, whether it's an Italian piece or not. And these are words like allegro, andante, adagio, or things like that. But we'll save that for another day. That's not necessarily where we need to get started with this. We can also indicate tempo with the use of a metronome marking. This gives a precise formula of how many beats we'll hear in exactly 1 minute of time, and it's written like this. So when we have a metronome marking, we indicate what unit and how many in a minute. The first one says that the quarter note equals 72, or in other words, in 1 minute, we'll hear 72 beats, each lasting a quarter note long. The other one says that the unit we're counting is the half note, and in 1 minute, we'll hear 60 of those. That one's a little easier to conceive even without a metronome, because if there is 60 per minute, there's 1 per second. So if you think of the seconds ticking away, and each of those are beats that last as long as a half note, you'll get the idea there. You should really get a metronome app for your phone. They're very inexpensive and they're very useful. And they'll be able to keep a steady beat for you, because while we're concentrating on all of the other things going on in performing a piece of music, sometimes we're not aware that we're not keeping a steady beat. As I said before, there's much more to time signatures and tempo, but this is a good place to get started at least. Now go practice.